Leona Taylor built La Vie en Cuisine to be a welcoming, inclusive restaurant empire, but when she discovers her trusted manager is subtly turning away people of color, her vision is shattered. Forced to confront the hidden prejudice within her own business, Leona embarks on a bold journey to reclaim her values and restore what she's worked so hard for. Will she rise above the backlash, or will the challenges she faces threaten everything she's built? Curious to see how Leona's story unfolds? Don't forget to subscribe, leave a comment with your thoughts, and stay tuned for more inspiring stories. Leona Taylor stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of her Los Angeles penthouse, the morning sun casting a warm glow over the room. The city skyline stretched out before her, a reflection of the success she had achieved in an industry that, for years, had made no room for someone like her. She sipped her coffee, her mind wandering through the memories of her journey, both the triumphs and the setbacks. At 38, Leona had achieved what most people could only dream of. She was the CEO and founder of La Vie en Cuisine, a high-end restaurant chain that had expanded to multiple cities: Los Angeles, New York, Chicago, and Miami. Her restaurants were known for their luxurious ambiance, impeccable service, and world-class cuisine. Critics adored her, and her name often appeared in major publications like Forbes and Bon Appetit. But success had not come easy, nor without personal cost. Leona reflected on her early days. She had grown up in a modest neighborhood in South Los Angeles, raised by a single mother who worked 2 jobs to provide for Leona and her brother Ben. It was her mother who had instilled in her a love for cooking. The small kitchen in their home had been a sanctuary for them, a place where they would bond over the scent of spices, herbs, and soul food recipes passed down through generations. Her mother always said, "If you can cook from the heart, you can cook for anyone." At first, cooking had been a passion. It wasn't until after college, where Leona had studied business, that she realized it could also be her livelihood. In her 20s, she started a small cafe, Leona's Kitchen, right in her old neighborhood. It was a humble beginning, a few tables, homemade pastries, and simple dishes inspired by her mother's recipes, but it had been enough to attract attention. People came for the food, but stayed for the warmth Leona brought to her restaurant. However, as she expanded her business and entered the fine dining world, the challenges began to mount. Investors doubted her ability to scale. Suppliers questioned whether she could handle the volume. And, most painfully, some customers turned their noses up at the idea of a black woman running an upscale establishment. Leona remembered those early confrontations vividly. There had been nights when, after a long shift, she would lock herself in the office and cry, not out of defeat but from sheer exhaustion. Despite all that, she persevered. She poured everything she had into La Vie en Cuisine, determined to prove that she not only belonged in the industry, but could thrive in it. And she did. Over the years, she had built an empire. Her flagship restaurant in downtown Los Angeles was the crown jewel of her achievements, the place where it all started to come together. It was a sleek, modern space with floor-to-ceiling windows, chic decor, and a wine list that drew praise from critics. But more than that, it was her heart. Leona smiled at the memory of her first review in a major publication. La Vie en Cuisine had been described as a celebration of culinary excellence where innovation meets tradition and every guest feels like royalty. That was exactly what she had set out to create, a space where everyone felt special, regardless of who they were. But now, as she looked out over the city that had both challenged and embraced her, something felt off. There was a nagging discomfort that had been growing over the past few months, a quiet dissonance that she couldn't ignore, and it all centered around one person: Max Dawson, the manager of her downtown Los Angeles location. Max had joined La Vie en Cuisine a little over 2 years ago. On paper, he had been the perfect candidate, polished, experienced, and with a reputation for efficiency. He had quickly risen through the ranks, earning Leona's trust as someone who could manage the day-to-day operations without constant oversight. But lately, She had started hearing whispers, subtle but disturbing, about her behavior toward certain customers. Leona had always prided herself on creating a space where everyone felt welcome, where discrimination had no place. But the rumors suggested otherwise. According to some staff members, Max was cold toward certain patrons, particularly people of color. He was polite on the surface but dismissive in tone, his actions reflecting an unspoken prejudice. More than one employee had come to Leona in confidence, sharing stories of customers being turned away even when tables were available, or of Max suggesting they might feel more comfortable somewhere else. It was all too familiar to Leona. She had experienced those same subtle forms of discrimination herself, especially in the early days, when she was fighting for a place at the table in the culinary world. She knew what it felt like to be judged by the color of her skin before a word had even been spoken, and that was why these rumors unsettled her so deeply. Could it be true? Could Max, someone she had trusted to uphold her vision for La Vie en Cuisine, be undermining everything she had worked for? Leona placed her coffee cup on the marble counter and stared out at the skyline. She needed to know the truth. It wasn't just about the reputation of her restaurant. It was about the principles she had built her entire business on. She couldn't let it slide. If Max was guilty of what people were saying, he had no place in her company. But first, she needed proof. She couldn't act on rumors alone. Leona took a deep breath and made her decision. She would go undercover, blending in as a regular customer to experience firsthand how Max ran her restaurant. It was a risky move. Her face was well known in the industry, and she had been featured in countless magazines, but it was the only way she could truly assess the situation. She needed to see with her own eyes how Max treated people when he didn't know who they were. Leona stood in front of her bedroom mirror later that afternoon, scrutinizing her reflection. She had deliberately chosen a simple outfit, nothing flashy, nothing that would draw attention. Her usual tailored suits and designer handbags were replaced with a plain white blouse, black slacks, and a worn leather bag slung over her shoulder. She had even tied her hair back into a low ponytail, a far cry from the styled waves she usually wore. The goal was to blend in, to appear as just another customer walking into an upscale restaurant. It was strange trying to hide in plain sight. After all, Leona had spent the last decade building a brand and an image. She was used to being recognized, whether it was at industry events or in her own restaurants. But today, she wanted to be invisible. She needed to see La Vie en Cuisine the way an ordinary customer might. Specifically, a customer who didn't fit the mold of the wealthy, predominantly white clientele that often filled the dining room. As she drove to the downtown Los Angeles location, her mind raced with possibilities. What if the rumors were exaggerated? What if Max was just strict but fair, and his demeanor was being misinterpreted? After all, managing a high-end restaurant required a certain level of authority. Or what if the whispers were true? What if her flagship restaurant, the crown jewel of her empire, was being tainted by subtle acts of racism right under her nose? The thought made her stomach churn. Leona parked her car a few blocks away from the restaurant, wanting to avoid any chance of being spotted by the staff before she was ready. As she approached the restaurant, she took in the familiar sight of the building's sleek modern facade. The glass doors, framed by polished steel, glinted in the afternoon sun. The restaurant had become a landmark in downtown Los Angeles, known for its luxury, its exclusivity, and its impeccable service. But today, Leona wasn't here as the owner. She was here as a guest. She stepped inside, the familiar scent of fresh bread and fine wine greeting her as she crossed the threshold. The interior was just as she had envisioned it years ago, chic, minimalist, with elegant lighting that made the entire space glow. Crisp white tablecloths adorned each table, while fresh floral arrangements added a touch of natural beauty to the sleek design. A hostess, A young woman with neatly tied back hair and a sharp black uniform stood behind the podium at the entrance. As Leona approached, the woman glanced up, her smile polite but noticeably restrained. "Good afternoon," the hostess said, her tone cool and professional. "Do you have a reservation?" Leona nodded, keeping her voice neutral. "Yes, Taylor. Party of one." The hostess tapped a few keys on the computer in front of her, her expression shifting slightly as she scanned the screen. Leona noticed the subtle furrow in her brow, the hesitation in her movements. "I'm sorry," the hostess said after a moment, her voice betraying a hint of discomfort. "It looks like we're fully booked for the evening." Leona blinked, glancing around the dining room. It was mid-afternoon, and while there were a few occupied tables, the room was nowhere near capacity. Several tables were clearly available, their pristine white tablecloths untouched. "Are you sure?" Leona asked, her tone calm but probing. "I can see a few open tables. I don't mind waiting if necessary." The hostess hesitated, glancing over her shoulder as if searching for guidance. Leona followed her gaze and saw Max Dawson making his way toward them. He was tall, with perfectly styled hair and a tailored suit that gave him an air of authority. But there was something in his expression that immediately put Leona on edge, a coldness behind his polite smile. "Is there a problem here?" Max asked, his voice smooth but laced with a condescending undertone. "No problem," Leona replied, meeting his gaze evenly. "I was just told that the restaurant is fully booked, but I'm willing to wait." Max's smile tightened, his eyes flickering with recognition, or perhaps calculation. "I'm afraid we are fully booked tonight," he said, his tone cool. "Perhaps you'd be more comfortable at one of the more casual places down the street." The words were polite enough on the surface, but the message was clear. "You don't belong here." Leona felt a surge of anger rise in her chest, but she kept her composure. She had seen this behavior before, experienced it firsthand in the early days of her career. It was the subtle racism that cut deeper than any overt insult, the kind that came wrapped in pleasantries and thinly veiled excuses. "I see," Leona said quietly. "Thank you for your time." With that, she turned and walked out of the restaurant, her heart pounding in her chest. Max had no idea who she was, but he was about to find out. By the time Leona returned home that evening, her mind was racing with conflicting emotions. Anger, disappointment, and a deep sense of betrayal swirled within her as she replayed the interaction with Max over and over in her head. He had treated her like she didn't belong in her own restaurant, a place she had built with her own hands from the ground up. The subtle way he had dismissed her, the assumption that she wasn't part of the right clientele, it all brought back memories of the struggles she had faced when she first entered the fine dining world. She had been judged by the color of her skin, not the content of her character or the quality of her work. And now it was happening again, within the very walls of the business she had created to break down those barriers. Leona poured herself a glass of wine and sank into the couch, her phone buzzing on the coffee table. It was her brother, Ben. She had texted him earlier about the incident, and now he was calling to check in. "Hey, sis." Ben's familiar voice came through the phone. "You okay? You sounded pissed in your message." Leona sighed, taking a sip of her wine. "I'm furious, Ben. I went to the restaurant today undercover. I wanted to see for myself how Max was running the place, and he turned me away, told me I'd be more comfortable at a casual spot down the street." Ben let out a low whistle. "No way. He really didn't recognize you?" "Nope," Leona replied, shaking her head. "Not a clue. And that's the part that bothers me the most. He didn't see me as the owner, the woman who built that restaurant. He just saw another black woman who didn't fit his idea of refined clientele." Ben was silent for a moment, and when he spoke again, His voice was filled with frustration. "You need to fire him, Leona. Like yesterday. That kind of behavior can't fly." "Not in your business. You work too hard to let some guy ruin it." Leona rubbed her temples, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on her. "I know, but I need to be careful. Firing someone like Max without concrete proof could cause problems. I need to gather more information, talk to the staff, and make sure this isn't an isolated incident." "Trust me, it's not," Ben said firmly. "If he treated you that way, I guarantee he's done it to other people. You built La Vie en Cuisine to be a place where everyone feels welcome. If Max is turning people away because of how they look, he's poisoning the entire culture." Leona sighed. "You're right. I'm going to handle this, but I need to be smart about it." After hanging up with Ben, Leona sat in silence, staring at the glass of wine in her hand. She had fought too hard, for too long, to let someone like Max undermine her vision, but she also knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Firing him would send shockwaves through the restaurant, and she needed to be prepared for the fallout. The next morning, Leona called Sarah Morgan, her longtime mentor and advisor. Sarah was a veteran of the restaurant industry, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s who had seen it all. She had been there for Leona from the beginning, offering guidance and support when the road got tough. "Leona, sweetheart, what's going on?" Sarah's voice crackled through the phone. "I heard you've been dealing with some issues at the downtown location." Leona quickly recapped the situation, detailing her undercover experience and the rumors she had heard about Max's behavior. When she finished, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. "I hate to say it, but I'm not surprised," Sarah finally said. "Max always seemed a bit too slick for his own good. He knows how to play the game, but clearly he's playing it wrong." "What should I do, Sarah?" Leona asked, her voice laced with frustration. "I can't let this continue, but I also can't act on rumors alone." "You need to talk to your staff," Sarah advised. "Get their side of the story. If Max has been treating people poorly, they'll know. But more importantly, you need to trust your instincts. You've built this empire by following your gut. And if your gut is telling you something's wrong, it probably is." Leona nodded, feeling a sense of clarity wash over her. Sarah was right. She needed to gather the facts, but she also needed to trust herself. This was her business, her legacy, and she wasn't going to let anyone tarnish it. Over the next few days, Leona quietly began investigating Max's behavior. She spoke to several employees at the downtown Los Angeles location, choosing those she trusted the most. Each conversation was discreet, held in the back office or after hours when Max wasn't around to overhear. Rachel Alvarez, a new waitress who had only been with the company for a few months, was one of the first people Leona spoke to. Rachel was young, eager, and full of potential. But there was an underlying tension in her posture as she sat across from Leona in the office. "I wasn't sure if I should say anything," Rachel admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I've noticed some things." Leona leaned forward, her heart pounding. "Go on." Rachel hesitated, glancing at the door before continuing. "I've seen Max turn people away. Not just anyone, mostly Black and Latino customers. He'll tell them we're fully booked even when we're not. I always thought it was weird, but I didn't know what to do." Leona's stomach twisted with anger. Rachel's story mirrored her own experience, confirming that Max's behavior wasn't a one-off incident. It was a pattern of discrimination. David Foster, a longtime employee who had been with La Vie en Cuisine since its opening, was more reluctant to talk. David was in his mid-40s, a reliable and hard-working member of the team. Leona had always trusted him, but she could tell he was uncomfortable with the conversation. "I don't want to get involved in any drama," David said, crossing his arms as he leaned against the office doorframe. "But yeah, I've noticed things. Max is selective, let's put it that way." Leona pressed him gently. "David, this isn't about drama. It's about protecting our customers and our business. If something's wrong, I need to know." David sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. "Look, Max isn't a bad guy on the surface. He's polite, professional. But he's got this attitude like he's better than certain people. I've seen him be rude to black customers, nothing overt, but enough to make them feel unwelcome. It's not right." Leona felt a wave of frustration wash over her. She had spent years cultivating a culture of inclusivity and warmth at La Vie en Cuisine, and now that culture was being tainted by someone she had trusted. Max wasn't just a bad employee. He was a liability, and his actions were damaging everything she had worked so hard to build. The more Leona talked to her staff, the clearer the picture became. Max had been systematically discriminating against people based on their race, all while hiding behind a veneer of professionalism. And worse, his behavior had gone unchecked for months. Leona's heart sank as she realized the full scope of the problem. This wasn't just about one man's actions. It was about the culture he had allowed to grow within her restaurant. A culture that needed to be eradicated, starting with Max. By the end of the week, Leona had gathered enough information to make her decision. She called her legal team, outlining her plan to fire Max and ensure that the dismissal was handled in a way that protected the business. There would be no room for error. Max would be gone, but the fallout needed to be managed carefully. The next morning, Leona dressed in a sharp, tailored suit, her mind focused and clear. She wasn't just going to fire Max, she was going to make a statement. This wasn't about one man's behavior. It was about upholding the values that had made La Vie en Cuisine what it was, a place where everyone was welcome, regardless of their background or appearance. As Leona approached the restaurant, her heels clicking purposefully on the sidewalk, she knew that the storm was coming, but she was ready for it. This was her business, her legacy, and she wasn't going to let anyone take that away from her. Leona stepped into La Vie en Cuisine that afternoon with a sense of purpose and determination that reverberated through her entire being. The familiar aroma of fresh bread and fine wine greeted her, but this time it did little to calm her nerves. Her tailored suit, a symbol of her authority and success, felt more like armor today, and she needed it, because this wasn't going to be just another day at the restaurant. This was going to be the day she reclaimed her business. As she entered the restaurant, she immediately noticed the shift in energy. The waitstaff exchanged nervous glances, whispers rippled through the room, and Max Dawson, standing near the bar, froze the moment he spotted her. His normally confident demeanor faltered for a brief second before he composed himself, his eyes narrowing as if calculating what her unexpected visit meant. Leona didn't waver. She walked directly toward him, her heels clicking sharply against the polished floor, each step a reminder that she was in control. Max straightened up, his face adopting a polite but rigid expression. "Ms. Taylor," Max greeted her with forced cheerfulness, extending his hand. "I didn't expect you today. Is there something I can assist you with?" Leona didn't take his hand. She wasn't here for pleasantries. "Let's talk in my office," Leona said, her tone calm but with an undercurrent of authority that left no room for argument. Without waiting for a response, she turned and began walking toward the back office. Max hesitated for a moment before following her, the tension between them thick enough to cut with a knife. The staff, sensing the brewing storm, pretended to focus on their tasks, though it was clear that everyone's attention was now on the two of them. As they entered the office, Leona closed the door behind them and took a seat behind her desk, gesturing for Max to sit across from her. He complied, though there was a slight tremor in his movements that betrayed his unease. Leona took a deep breath, keeping her emotions in check. She had spent the past week preparing for this moment, gathering evidence, speaking with her staff, and making sure that everything was in place. Now, it was time to confront the man who had undermined her business and her vision. "Max," Leona began, her voice steady but firm, "I've heard some troubling things about how you've been managing this restaurant." Max's brow furrowed, but he kept his face neutral. "I'm not sure what you're referring to, Ms. Taylor. As far as I'm aware, the restaurant has been running smoothly." Leona didn't buy the act. "I'm referring to your treatment of certain customers, specifically Black and Latino customers. I've been told that you've been turning people away, even when the restaurant isn't full, that you've been suggesting certain patrons might be more comfortable elsewhere." Max's expression didn't change, but a flicker of defensiveness flashed in his eyes. "Ms. Taylor, I assure you, I've always acted in the best interests of the restaurant. Our clientele expects a certain level of service, and I've made sure to maintain those standards." Leona felt a surge of anger, but she kept it in check. She had to remain composed. "Standards?" she repeated, her tone sharp. "Is that what you call discriminating against people based on their appearance? Because what you've been doing isn't about maintaining standards, Max. It's about prejudice, and it's unacceptable." Max shifted in his seat, his calm facade starting to crack. "I don't discriminate. I've always been professional with all of our customers." Leona leaned forward, her eyes locked on his. "I was here last week, Max. I came in as a regular customer, dressed casually, no entourage. You didn't recognize me, and you turned me away. Told me I might feel more comfortable at a casual place down the street. You didn't even check my reservation." Max's face paled. He opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. Leona continued, not giving him a chance to recover. "I've spoken to the staff. I've heard enough stories to know that this wasn't an isolated incident. You've been doing this for months. And the worst part? You've been doing it behind my back, in the very restaurant I built to be a place where everyone feels welcome." The weight of her words hung in the air, and for a moment, the only sound in the room was the faint ticking of the wall clock. Max's shoulders slumped, the confidence and bravado he had walked in with now completely gone. "I didn't mean," Max stammered, his voice weak. "I didn't realize—" "You didn't realize I was the owner," Leona finished for him, her voice cold. "But that's the problem, isn't it? You shouldn't have to know who someone is to treat them with respect." Max lowered his head, his hands gripping the arms of the chair, as if searching for something to hold on to. "Ms. Taylor, I'm sorry. It was a mistake. I never meant to offend you or anyone else." Leona stood up, her heart pounding, but her resolve unwavering. "It wasn't just a mistake, Max. It was a choice. And now, you're going to face the consequences of that choice." Max looked up at her, desperation in his eyes. "Please, Ms. Taylor, I've been loyal to this restaurant. I've worked hard." "And I appreciate your hard work," Leona cut him off. "But loyalty doesn't excuse discrimination. Effective immediately, you are no longer employed at La Vie en Cuisine. Clean out your office and leave the premises." Max's face turned ashen, his mouth opening and closing as if trying to find the right words to argue, to plead. But there was nothing left to say. Leona's decision was final, and he knew it. Without another word, Max rose from his seat and walked toward the door, his shoulders slumped in defeat. As he left the office, the door clicking shut behind him, Leona allowed herself to exhale, the tension that had been building inside her finally releasing. It was done. But even as she sat down, her mind already racing with what came next. Firing Max was just the beginning. The real work, repairing the damage he had caused to her restaurant's culture and rebuilding the trust that had been broken, was still ahead. Leona's phone buzzed incessantly the following morning, the notification light blinking in quick succession. Emails, text messages, social media alerts. It was clear that word had spread quickly about Max's dismissal, and as Leona scanned the headlines, she realized that the story had already caught the attention of the media. Local news outlets had picked up on the firing, and it wasn't long before the bigger publications got wind of it. Famed restaurateur fires manager over allegations of discrimination, read one headline. Is La Vie en Cuisine upholding its values? A closer look at Leona Taylor's decision, read another. Leona groaned. She had known that firing Max would make waves, but she hadn't anticipated the media frenzy that followed. She scrolled through her email inbox, spotting messages from reporters requesting interviews, as well as concerned messages from her PR team. She clicked on an email from Miranda, her head of public relations. Miranda, Leona, we need to get ahead of this ASAP. I've already drafted a press statement for your approval. The media is spinning this as a potential PR disaster, but I think we can control the narrative if we act quickly. Let's meet this afternoon to discuss strategy. Leona leaned back in her chair, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on her. Max's firing had been necessary. She stood by that decision, but now she had to manage the fallout. The media was eager to frame the story as one of scandal, but Leona knew that the real story wasn't about firing a manager. It was about upholding the values she had built her entire business around. She needed to take control of the narrative before it spiraled out of control. A few hours later, Leona sat in her office surrounded by her core team, Miranda, Sarah, and Angela Davis, the diversity consultant she had brought on board to help navigate this crisis. Angela had been instrumental in guiding Leona through the initial stages of addressing the issues at the restaurant, and now her expertise was more valuable than ever. We need to be clear about why Max was fired, Miranda said, glancing down at her notes. This can't just be about one person's behavior. It has to be about the culture we're trying to foster at La Vie en Cuisine. Leona nodded, her thoughts aligning with Miranda's. Exactly. This isn't just about Max, it's about making sure that everyone who walks through our doors feels welcome, no matter who they are. I want that to be the focus. Angela leaned forward, her voice calm but firm. This is an opportunity for you to take a stand, Leona. The media might try to frame this as a scandal, but you can turn it into a positive message. Use this moment to show that you're committed to creating a more inclusive environment. Leona exhaled slowly, feeling the tension in her shoulders ease just a bit. She trusted Angela's judgment, and she knew that this was the right approach. The situation might be challenging, but it was also an opportunity to reaffirm her values. Let's draft a statement, Leona said, pulling out her notepad. I want to address the firing, but I also want to talk about the steps we're taking to ensure this never happens again. We need to focus on accountability, transparency, and change. The team spent the next several hours fine-tuning the statement, ensuring that every word reflected Leona's commitment to her vision. By the time they were done, the message was clear. La Vie en Cuisine was a place where everyone was welcome, and any behavior that undermined that core value would not be tolerated. Leona's public statement, at La Vie en Cuisine, we have always prided ourselves on creating an inclusive and welcoming environment for all of our guests. Recently, it came to my attention that certain behaviors within our restaurant did not align with these values. After careful consideration and a thorough investigation, I made the difficult decision to part ways with a member of our management team. This decision was not made lightly, but it was necessary to uphold the principles that have made La Vie en Cuisine what it is today. We are taking immediate steps to ensure that incidents of discrimination and exclusion are addressed, and we are implementing new policies to foster a culture of respect, diversity, and inclusivity. This includes additional training for all staff and a commitment to making La Vie en Cuisine a place where everyone, regardless of race, background, or appearance, feels welcome. Thank you to all of our patrons and supporters for your understanding as we move forward. We remain dedicated to providing the highest level of service, and we look forward to continuing to serve you in a space where everyone belongs. Leona's statement was released that evening, and the response was immediate. Social media buzzed with reactions, some praising her for taking a stand, others criticizing her for overreacting or playing the race card. The polarized responses didn't surprise her, but it did wear on her. For every message of support, there seemed to be an equally harsh comment accusing her of making a mountain out of a molehill. I knew this was coming, Leona muttered to herself as she scrolled through Twitter, watching as the debates played out in real time. She had expected pushback. After all, addressing discrimination head-on was never going to be easy, especially in an industry that often resisted change, but the backlash was harder to stomach than she had anticipated. Some customers canceled their reservations and others posted negative reviews online, accusing her of turning the restaurant into a political battleground. It was frustrating, but Leona refused to be swayed by the negativity. She had made her choice and she stood by it. The following week, Leona held a company-wide meeting with her staff, addressing them directly for the first time since Max's firing. The atmosphere in the restaurant was tense, with employees unsure of what to expect. Some were still loyal to Max, while others were relieved to see him gone. But as Leona stood in front of them, her voice clear and strong, she knew that this was her chance to set the tone for the future. I know the past few weeks have been challenging, Leona began, her eyes scanning the room. But I want to be clear about one thing. La Vie en Cuisine is a place where everyone is welcome. That's not just a slogan, it's the foundation of everything we do here, and I will not tolerate behavior that undermines that. She paused, letting her words sink in. We're implementing new policies to ensure that this restaurant is a safe, inclusive space for everyone. There will be training on diversity and inclusion, and I expect every single one of you to participate fully. If anyone has an issue with that, if anyone feels that this isn't the place for them anymore, then I encourage you to reconsider your role here. The room was silent, but Leona could see the mixed emotions on her employees' faces. Some nodded in agreement, while others looked uncomfortable. But that was to be expected. Change was never easy, and Leona knew that not everyone would be on board. After the meeting, Leona spent time speaking with individual staff members, reassuring them and listening to their concerns. She knew that rebuilding trust would take time, but she was committed to making sure that the culture of her restaurant reflected the values she held dear. That night, as Leona walked through the quiet, dimly lit dining room, she felt the weight of the past few weeks pressing down on her. The journey wasn't over. There would still be challenges, still be pushback. But she knew, deep down, that she had made the right choice. This is just the beginning, she thought, as she locked the door behind her and stepped out into the cool night air. The weeks following Max's dismissal were some of the most difficult in Leona's career. The backlash from his firing hadn't fully subsided, and the media coverage continued to stoke debates about race, inclusivity, and the fine line between professionalism and prejudice in the service industry. But Leona wasn't just sitting back and watching it unfold. She was taking action. Angela Davis had already begun implementing the diversity and inclusion training that Leona had promised in her statement. The training sessions were mandatory for all staff members, from the kitchen to the front of house. Leona made sure that she participated as well, leading by example and showing her team that this wasn't just a box to check off. It was a core part of the restaurant's future. The first training session was met with a mix of reactions. Some employees, like Rachel Alvarez, embraced the opportunity to learn and grow. Rachel had been vocal about the need for change, and during the sessions she spoke openly about her experiences with bias, both as a customer and as an employee in the service industry. "It's not just about what's said," Rachel explained during one of the discussions. "It's about the looks, the tone, the way someone makes you feel like you don't belong. That's what hurts the most, the feeling that you're being judged before you've even had a chance to speak." Leona listened intently, feeling a deep sense of pride in Rachel's courage. It wasn't easy to speak up, especially in front of colleagues, but Rachel's words resonated with many of the staff. She had articulated what so many people of color felt in spaces that weren't designed with them in mind. But not everyone was receptive to the changes. There were still a few employees who were resistant, especially those who had been close to Max. They muttered complaints under their breath about political correctness and rolled their eyes during the training sessions. Leona kept a close eye on them, knowing that this resistance could become a problem if left unchecked. David Foster, one of the senior waitstaff, had been more reserved during the early discussions, but eventually he too opened up. David had always been reliable, and though he wasn't the most vocal member of the team, Leona trusted his judgment. "I've been here a long time," David said during one of the breakout sessions. "I've seen things, heard things. There's been a lot of unspoken stuff that goes on in the industry. People getting treated differently based on how they look, where they're from, and I've stayed quiet for too long." Leona watched as David's words hit home for many of the other staff members. The conversation wasn't just about one incident or one person. It was about the culture of the restaurant industry as a whole. And that was a culture Leona was determined to change. Angela guided the team through difficult but necessary conversations about race, privilege, and unconscious bias. It wasn't always easy, and there were moments when the tension in the room was palpable. But Leona knew that this was the work that had to be done if her restaurant was going to move forward. By the end of the first round of training sessions, there was a noticeable shift in the atmosphere at La Vie en Cuisine. The staff was beginning to understand that the changes weren't just cosmetic, they were foundational. Leona had made it clear that inclusivity wasn't optional, it was a requirement. But while progress was being made internally, the external challenges continued. The restaurant's reservations had dipped significantly since Max's firing, and some of the regular clientele had stopped coming altogether. It was disheartening, but Leona refused to let it deter her. "This isn't just about the bottom line," Leona reminded herself one evening as she reviewed the latest financial reports. "This is about doing what's right." Leona's public statement and the changes at the restaurant had also attracted attention from the wider restaurant community. Some of her peers reached out to her, offering support and encouragement. Others, however, were more critical, accusing her of making a spectacle out of the situation. "It's hard to change an industry that's stuck in its ways," Sarah had told her during one of their conversations. "But someone has to do it, and if anyone can, it's you." Leona took those words to heart. She knew that the road ahead would be long and filled with obstacles, but she was more determined than ever to see it through. Just when Leona felt like she was beginning to regain control, a new challenge emerged, one that threatened to undo all the progress she had made. Late one evening, as Leona was preparing for bed, her phone buzzed with a notification that sent her heart sinking. It was a video. Max Dawson had resurfaced. The video, posted by a local news outlet, featured Max giving an interview about his dismissal from La Vie en Cuisine. His face, once pale with shock during their confrontation, was now calm and composed as he spoke directly into the camera. The headline beneath his image read, "Former manager speaks out. Fired over alleged reverse racism at famed restaurant." Leona's stomach churned as she hit play. In the video, Max spoke carefully, positioning himself as a victim of overzealous political correctness. He claimed that he had been fired for simply doing his job, maintaining the high standards of La Vie en Cuisine. "I've always treated all of our customers with respect," Max said, his voice measured. "But when you're managing an upscale restaurant, you have to make tough decisions to ensure that the atmosphere is right for the clientele. It's unfortunate that Ms. Taylor misinterpreted my actions and decided to take such drastic measures." The video cut to clips of customers who sympathized with Max, some of whom expressed their frustration with the changes at the restaurant. One former patron claimed that La Vie en Cuisine had become too focused on politics, and that the atmosphere had changed for the worse since Max's departure. Leona's blood boiled as she listened to the twisted narrative Max had crafted. He had taken the situation and spun it into a story where he was the wronged party, where Leona's commitment to inclusivity was framed as an attack on high standards. The video quickly went viral, and within hours, social media was ablaze with debates about reverse racism, political correctness, and the place of inclusivity in fine dining. The backlash was swift, and once again, Leona found herself in the eye of the storm. Her phone buzzed constantly with notifications, angry tweets, skeptical comments, and a flood of messages from concerned customers and industry colleagues. Some accused her of ruining a man's career over a misunderstanding, while others took the opportunity to voice their discontent with the direction the restaurant was taking. Leona felt a sinking feeling in her chest. The momentum she had worked so hard to build was slipping away. The restaurant's reservations, which had been slowly recovering, took another hit. Cancellations poured in, and some of her most loyal customers openly questioned whether they would return. For the first time in weeks, Leona felt doubt creeping in. Had she made the right choice? Had she acted too quickly without considering the full implications? The thought gnawed at her, threatening to unravel her confidence. But as the hours passed and the initial shock of the video wore off, Leona's resolve began to return. She had made the right decision. She had stood up for her values and her business. And no matter how much Max tried to twist the story, she wouldn't let him undermine what she had worked so hard to create. Leona called an emergency meeting with her PR team and Angela Davis. They needed to address the video head-on and reclaim the narrative before it spiraled further out of control. "We need to respond to this," Leona said, pacing the room as she spoke. "But we can't let Max dictate the terms. This isn't about him, it's about the culture we're building at La Vie en Cuisine." Angela nodded in agreement. "You've already set the tone with your public statement. Now we need to reinforce it. Don't engage with Max directly. That's exactly what he wants. Instead, focus on the positive changes you've made and the steps you're taking to move forward." Miranda, the PR director, chimed in. "We can reach out to some of the customers who have supported the changes, maybe feature their testimonials in a follow-up statement or video. We need to show that the restaurant is evolving and that these changes are resonating with people." Leona considered their suggestions, her mind racing as she thought about how to regain control of the situation. Max had struck a blow, but she wasn't about to let him win. By the end of the meeting, the team had crafted a new strategy. Leona would release another statement, this time focusing on the positive impact the changes were having on both the staff and the customers. They would highlight the voices of those who supported the restaurant's direction, and they would emphasize the importance of inclusivity and respect in every aspect of the business. Leona also decided to take things one step further. She would host a community dinner at the flagship restaurant, a public event that would invite people from all walks of life to come together and share a meal. It would be an opportunity to showcase the new culture of La Vie en Cuisine and to reaffirm her commitment to creating a space where everyone was welcome. The setback had been painful, but Leona wasn't going to let it define her. She had fought too hard to get where she was, and she wasn't about to let one man's lies tear it all down. As the team dispersed and Leona sat alone in her office, she allowed herself a moment of reflection. The road ahead would be difficult, but she had faced challenges before, and each time she had come out stronger. This time would be no different. The days following Max's viral interview were chaotic, to say the least. The debate raged across social media and beyond, but Leona Taylor refused to back down. She spent long hours with her PR team and Angela Davis, focusing on how to reshape the narrative and push forward with her plan. What had once felt like a massive setback now began to morph into an opportunity for transformation. But Leona knew that action would speak louder than any statement. Her team worked tirelessly to put together the details of the upcoming community dinner, a breaking bread together event meant to show that La Vie en Cuisine was more than just a luxury dining spot. It was a place where people from every background could gather and share not only food, but also experiences and stories. The event would be a public invitation for all, regardless of background or wealth, and a statement to the world about the kind of restaurant Leona was determined to run. As the preparations for the event ramped up, Leona found herself reflecting on the deeper meaning of the dinner. Hosting it wasn't just about saving her reputation. It was about creating the kind of space she had always envisioned. She thought back to her roots, her mother's small kitchen in South Los Angeles, the laughter that filled the room as they cooked together, and the warmth of shared meals. That was the feeling she wanted to recreate, even in the polished, upscale setting of La Vie en Cuisine. The invitations for the Breaking Bread Together dinner were sent out, and the response was overwhelming. Local community leaders, activists, food bloggers, and even some of the restaurant's loyal customers responded enthusiastically. The dinner wasn't just a media stunt, it was a genuine effort to build bridges and bring people together. On the night of the event, Leona stood at the entrance of the restaurant, her heart pounding as guests began to arrive. The space had been transformed for the occasion. Long communal tables replaced the traditional fine dining setup, adorned with simple yet elegant centerpieces of fresh flowers and candles. The atmosphere was warm, welcoming, and intimate. As people began to file in, Leona couldn't help but notice the diversity of the crowd. Community organizers in jeans and sneakers sat next to well-dressed professionals. Couples, families, and groups of friends from all walks of life mingled with one another, united by their shared love of food and conversation. It was exactly the kind of scene Leona had dreamed of, one where barriers disappeared and people connected over a meal. Angela Davis, standing by her side, smiled as she surveyed the scene. "This is what it's all about," she said quietly. "This is the future you're building, Leona." Leona felt a wave of pride and gratitude. "It's everything I hoped it would be." As the evening progressed, Leona made her way through the dining room, stopping to chat with guests, sharing stories and listening to their experiences. The mood was light, filled with laughter and the sounds of clinking glasses. For the first time in weeks, Leona felt a sense of peace. The noise from the outside world, the debates, the criticism, the backlash, faded into the background. Here, in this moment, the restaurant felt alive with possibility. Later in the evening, as the main courses were being served, Leona stepped to the front of the room to address the guests. She had spoken at countless events before, but tonight felt different. This wasn't about promoting her brand or her business. It was about something much deeper. "Good evening, everyone," she began, her voice clear but soft, filled with emotion. The room quieted as all eyes turned to her. "Thank you so much for being here tonight. This dinner means more to me than I can express." She paused, scanning the room, taking in the faces of people who had come together not because of controversy or headlines, but because they believed in the power of community. "When I started La Vie en Cuisine, I had a dream of creating a place where everyone felt welcome, a place where we could break bread together no matter who we were or where we came from," Leona continued. But recently I was reminded that this dream is something we have to fight for every single day. It's not enough to say we believe in inclusion and respect. We have to live those values. And tonight, seeing all of you here, I feel more committed than ever to that mission." There was a soft murmur of agreement from the crowd, and Leona smiled, feeling the weight of her words lift some of the tension that had been sitting on her shoulders for so long. "This dinner isn't just about food," she said. "It's about connection. It's about building bridges and creating spaces where we can truly come together. So thank you. Thank you for being part of that vision." As Leona finished her speech, the room erupted into applause and she felt a deep sense of satisfaction. This was what mattered. This was why she had built her restaurant and why she had fought so hard to protect it. The night continued with lively conversations, shared stories, and the joy of being part of something bigger than just a meal. As the guests began to leave, one by one, Leona stood at the entrance, thanking each person personally for coming. By the end of the evening, as the last guest departed and the dining room quieted down, Leona stood in the middle of the space, taking in the remnants of the night, the empty wine glasses, the half-burned candles, the lingering warmth of the shared meal. This was more than just a successful event. It was the beginning of something new. In the days following the Breaking Bread Together event, the atmosphere at La Vie en Cuisine shifted. The dinner had been a success, not just in terms of media coverage, but also in the way it had brought people together. The backlash that had once seemed overwhelming now felt distant, drowned out by the positive response from the community and the renewed energy within the restaurant. Leona had known the fight wouldn't be easy, but now she felt more confident than ever that she was on the right path. She had taken a stand, and while not everyone agreed with her, she had stayed true to her values. And that, in the end, was what mattered most. Her decision to host the community dinner had caught the attention of other restaurant owners in Los Angeles, some of whom reached out to her privately to offer their support and share their own experiences with discrimination in the industry. Others expressed interest in holding similar events, asking for advice on how to create more inclusive spaces in their own businesses. Leona was heartened by these conversations. Change, she realized, didn't happen in isolation. It required a collective effort, a movement. And while the road ahead was long, she felt hopeful that the industry was beginning to wake up to the need for true inclusivity. At the same time, the restaurant itself began to transform. The staff, many of whom had initially been resistant to the changes, started to embrace the new direction. The diversity training sessions that Angela had led had sparked important conversations among the employees, and Leona noticed a newfound sense of camaraderie among the team. The subtle tensions that had once lingered beneath the surface seemed to dissolve as the staff came to understand that the changes were about more than just policies. They were about creating a better environment for everyone. Leona's decision to publicly address the restaurant's culture had also resonated with the customers. The reservations that had dipped after Max's firing began to pick back up, and soon the dining room was full once again. But this time the clientele was more diverse, a true reflection of the city of Los Angeles. People of all races, backgrounds, and walks of life filled the tables, and Leona couldn't help but feel a deep sense of pride as she watched them enjoy their meals in the space she had worked so hard to build. It wasn't long before Leona's efforts began to attract national attention. She was invited to speak at industry conferences, to share her story and the lessons she had learned about running an inclusive business. At first, she was hesitant. Public speaking had never been her favorite part of the job, but Angela encouraged her to take the opportunity. "Your story is powerful, Leona," Angela said during one of their meetings. "You've done something that a lot of people in this industry are too afraid to do. You've taken a stand, and people need to hear that." Leona knew Angela was right. It wasn't enough to make changes within her own business. She needed to use her platform to push for change across the entire industry. The restaurant world had long been dominated by exclusivity, with certain voices being prioritized while others were silenced. Leona had the chance to challenge that status quo, and she wasn't going to let it slip by. At one of her first speaking engagements, Leona stood in front of a packed room of fellow restaurateurs, chefs, and industry professionals. Her heart pounded as she prepared to tell her story, but as she looked out at the audience, she felt a sense of calm wash over her. She had been through so much already. This was just another step in the journey. When I first started La Vie en Cuisine, I had no idea what I was up against, Leona began, her voice steady but filled with emotion. As a black woman in the fine dining world, I faced a lot of challenges. People didn't think I belonged in this industry, but I fought to build my business because I believed in my vision, a vision of a place where everyone could come together and feel welcome. She paused, letting her words sink in. But recently, I had to confront something difficult. I realized that even within my own restaurant, the culture I had worked so hard to create was being undermined. There were people who didn't feel welcome, people who were being judged not by their character or their love of food, but by the color of their skin. The room was silent, the weight of her words hanging in the air. I had to make a choice, Leona continued. I could stay silent, or I could take a stand, and I chose to take a stand. Not just for myself, but for every person who has ever felt like they didn't belong. Leona went on to talk about the steps she had taken to address the issues within her restaurant. The firing of Max, the diversity training, the community dinner, and the impact those changes had made. She emphasized the importance of creating spaces where everyone felt valued, not just the people who fit the traditional mold of a fine dining customer. The response to her speech was overwhelming. Afterward, countless people approached her to thank her for sharing her story and to ask how they could implement similar changes in their own businesses. Leona felt a renewed sense of purpose. She had started something important, and now she was determined to keep pushing for change, not just at La Vie en Cuisine, but across the entire industry. Months had passed since Max's firing, and life at La Vie en Cuisine had settled into a new, more harmonious rhythm. The restaurant was busier than ever, and Leona's commitment to inclusivity had become a cornerstone of the brand. Customers who had once been skeptical now praised the changes, and new patrons flocked to the restaurant, eager to be part of the welcoming atmosphere Leona had worked so hard to create. But as successful as La Vie en Cuisine had become, Leona's focus was no longer just on her restaurant. The Breaking Bread Foundation, the non-profit organization she had launched to support minority-owned businesses in the hospitality industry, had taken off in a big way. What had started as a small initiative to offer grants and mentorship to up-and-coming restaurateurs had grown into a full-fledged movement, with industry leaders, activists, and philanthropists all rallying behind the cause. The foundation had already helped several young entrepreneurs launch their own businesses, providing them with the financial support and guidance they needed to succeed in an industry that often stacked the odds against them. Leona had made it her mission to lift others up, just as she had been lifted by mentors like Sarah Morgan during her own journey. One evening, as Leona sat in the dining room of her flagship restaurant, reflecting on everything that had happened over the past year, she spotted a young black woman sitting at a table with her parents. The woman was animated, talking passionately about something as her parents listened with pride. Leona watched them for a moment, smiling at herself. After a few minutes, Leona walked over to their table, introducing herself. The young woman's eyes lit up with recognition. "You're Leona Taylor," she said, her voice filled with awe. "I've read so much about you. I actually applied for one of the Breaking Bread Foundation grants." Leona raised her eyebrows in surprise. Really? Tell me more. The woman's face lit up as she began to explain her dream of opening her own restaurant, inspired by her grandmother's southern recipes. I've been working on it for years, but I never thought I'd have the opportunity to actually make it happen. When I heard about the foundation, I knew I had to apply. Leona smiled, feeling a familiar sense of pride. "What's your name?" she asked. "Jade," the young woman replied. "Jade Evans." "Well, Jade," Leona said, her voice warm, "I'm so glad you applied, and I can't wait to see what you do with your restaurant." Jade beamed, and Leona felt a deep sense of fulfillment. This, helping others achieve their dreams, was the true reward for everything she had been through. As Leona walked back to her table, she thought about how far she had come. From a small cafe in South Los Angeles to a nationally recognized restaurant empire, she had built something lasting, something that would continue to impact people long after she was gone. That night, as she stepped outside into the cool night air, Leona gazed up at the stars. The challenges she had faced, the discrimination, the doubts, the betrayals had all been part of her journey. And in the end, they had made her stronger. But more than that, they had given her the opportunity to create something meaningful. Leona had not only built a successful business, she had built a legacy. And as she stood there, feeling the weight of everything she had accomplished, she knew that this was just the beginning. The fight for inclusivity, for fairness, and for a better future was far from over. But Leona was ready, because she wasn't just breaking bread. She was breaking barriers. Leona sat behind her sleek mahogany desk, surrounded by papers and plans for the Breaking Bread Foundation's next round of grants. The foundation had become more than she ever imagined, growing into a movement that was changing lives. Its mission to support minority-owned businesses in the hospitality industry had gained widespread attention, and it was already making a tangible difference. As Leona flipped through applications for the upcoming grant cycle, she was struck by the diversity of the candidates. Each story was unique, but they all shared one common thread: a desire to break through the barriers that had held them back, just as Leona had done years ago. One applicant, a young Latina woman named Sophia, had grown up in a small town with dreams of opening a bakery. Her application detailed the struggles she'd faced: family members doubting her ability to succeed, financial institutions refusing to take her seriously, and the constant feeling that the doors of opportunity were closed to her. But despite these challenges, she had persevered, working long hours at a local bakery while saving every penny to make her dream a reality. Another applicant, Darius, a black chef from Chicago, wanted to open a food truck that would serve healthy, affordable meals in low-income neighborhoods. His passion for food was deeply rooted in his desire to give back to the community he had grown up in, where fresh and nutritious food options were scarce. His application was filled with innovative ideas, and it was clear that his vision extended beyond simply running a business. It was about creating a positive impact on the people around him. Leona couldn't help but feel a deep connection to these aspiring entrepreneurs. Their dreams were reflections of her own, and as she reviewed their applications, she was reminded of why she had started the Breaking Bread Foundation in the first place. It wasn't just about helping people build businesses. It was about empowering them to break through the systemic barriers that had been placed in their way for far too long. Angela Davis entered the office, her face lighting up as she saw the stack of applications on Leona's desk. "Busy day, huh?" Angela said, settling into the chair across from her. Leona smiled, pushing a few of the applications aside. "It's a good kind of busy. The foundation's growing faster than I expected. I knew we'd make an impact, but this..." She gestured to the pile of applications. "This is beyond what I imagined." Angela nodded, her eyes scanning the room before meeting Leona's gaze. "You've built something special, Leona." The foundation is changing lives, just like you've changed the restaurant industry." Leona leaned back in her chair, exhaling deeply. "I know, but sometimes it still feels surreal. I've spent so much time fighting for my place in this industry, and now I'm the one helping others get their start. It's overwhelming in a good way." "You earned this," Angela said firmly. "You've done the hard work. Now it's about giving others the chance to succeed. You're creating a legacy, Leona." Leona's eyes softened as she thought about the word legacy. She had always associated that word with people who had achieved untouchable levels of success. People like the iconic chefs and restaurateurs who dominated the industry. But now, she was starting to understand that legacy wasn't just about fame or fortune. It was about impact, and she was making an impact in ways she had never imagined. Angela smiled and stood up, grabbing a few of the applications from Leona's desk. "Come on, let's take a look at these together. We've got some incredible candidates to choose from." As they spent the next few hours discussing the grant applications, Leona couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was happening. The Breaking Bread Foundation was just the beginning. It had opened the door for conversations about equity, opportunity, and inclusivity in the hospitality industry. Conversations that had been long overdue. And while the road ahead would undoubtedly be filled with challenges, Leona was ready to lead the charge. That evening, Leona attended the Foundation's annual gala, an event designed to celebrate the achievements of the grant recipients and to raise funds for future initiatives. The room was filled with industry leaders, community activists, and supporters of the Foundation, all gathered to honor the work that had been done so far. As Leona made her way through the crowd, she was stopped by a familiar face, Rachel Alvarez, one of her former employees from La Vie en Cuisine. Rachel had left the restaurant a few months earlier to pursue her dream of starting her own catering business, a decision that Leona had fully supported. "Leona," Rachel exclaimed, pulling her into a warm embrace. "It's so good to see you. The gala is amazing. I can't believe how far the Foundation has come." Leona smiled, feeling a rush of pride. "It's been a wild ride, but we're just getting started." Rachel's eyes sparkled with excitement. "I can't thank you enough for everything you've done for me. The Foundation's mentorship program helped me get my business off the ground, and I'm finally doing what I love. It's all thanks to you." Leona shook her head, placing a hand on Rachel's shoulder. "You did this, Rachel. You had the vision, the passion. All we did was help you get where you needed to be." As the night continued, Leona was approached by countless guests who shared similar stories of how the Foundation had impacted their lives. It was humbling, and Leona couldn't help but reflect on how far she had come, from the young woman who had started a small cafe in South Los Angeles to the CEO of a successful restaurant empire, and now the founder of a foundation that was changing the landscape of the industry. Later that evening, as the gala wound down and the guests began to leave, Leona found herself standing alone on the terrace, looking out at the city skyline. The cool breeze brushed against her skin, and for a moment, she allowed herself to take it all on the journey, the struggles, the triumphs. This was her legacy, and it was just the beginning. Months later, Leona sat in the corner booth of her flagship restaurant, reflecting on the transformation that had taken place both within her business and within herself. The restaurant was filled with the hum of conversation, the clinking of glasses, and the soft glow of candlelight. But what stood out to her most was the energy. It was warm, inviting, and full of life. The past year had been a whirlwind of change. The firing of Max, the media backlash, and the challenges of reshaping the restaurant's culture had tested Leona in ways she hadn't anticipated. But through it all, she had stayed true to her values, and the result was something she was deeply proud of. The restaurant was thriving, and not just financially. The staff was more engaged than ever, and the diversity training that Angela had implemented had brought a new level of understanding and respect among the team. The customers had taken notice too, and the dining room was now filled with people from all walks of life, something that Leona had always dreamed of. As Leona sipped her coffee, she noticed a familiar face at one of the tables near the front of the restaurant. Jade Evans, the young woman she had met months earlier at the community dinner. Jade had been one of the grant recipients of the Breaking Bread Foundation, and tonight she was celebrating the grand opening of her own restaurant. Leona watched as Jade chatted animatedly with her family and friends, her face glowing with excitement. It was a full-circle moment for Leona, and she couldn't help but feel a deep sense of pride. Jade's success was a testament to the power of giving people the opportunities they deserved. After a few moments, Leona made her way over to Jade's table, a smile spreading across her face. "Jade," Leona said warmly, "how's everything going? I heard the big news. Congratulations on your grand opening." Jade looked up, her eyes wide with gratitude. "Leona, thank you so much. I couldn't have done it without the foundation's help. My restaurant is already fully booked for the next 2 weeks. It's more than I ever could have imagined." Leona smiled, feeling a familiar surge of pride. "You did this, Jade. You had the vision, the talent. I'm just glad we could help you get there." Jade beamed, and Leona felt a sense of fulfillment that went beyond any personal success she had achieved. This, helping others succeed, breaking down barriers, and creating opportunities was what mattered most. As the evening continued, Leona mingled with the guests, stopping to chat with customers and staff members alike. The restaurant had become more than just a business. It was a community, a place where people from all walks of life could come together and share in the joy of good food and conversation. Leona thought back to the early days of her career, when she had faced so many obstacles, discrimination, doubt, and the constant feeling that she didn't belong. But now, standing in the middle of the restaurant she had built, surrounded by the people she had impacted, Leona knew that she had found her place. She had fought for her dream, and in doing so, she had opened the door for countless others to do the same. Later that night, after the last of the guests had left and the restaurant had quieted down, Leona took a moment to walk through the empty dining room. The soft glow of the lights cast a warm, golden hue over space, and Leona felt a deep sense of peace. The road she had traveled hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. She had faced discrimination, betrayal, and doubt, but she had come out stronger on the other side. And now, she was using her success to lift others up, to break down the barriers that had once stood in her way. As she stood in the quiet restaurant, Leona reflected on the legacy she was building, not just as a successful restaurateur, but as a leader, a mentor, and an advocate for change. She wasn't just breaking bread anymore. She was breaking barriers, and she knew, without a doubt, that her journey was far from over. Thank you for joining me on this journey with Leona and La Vie en Cuisine. If you enjoy this story of resilience, empowerment, and breaking barriers, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. Join our community for more inspiring stories, creative content, and so much more. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let's continue this conversation. See you in the next one.